I'm going to apologize by telling you I don't have a presentation either prepared. I started to do one, but when Tobin originally asked me to speak, I thought to myself, how am I possibly going to say what needs to be said in 10 minutes? And then when Tobin said to me that I would be speaking about what we can do in the absence of action by government and business, I thought to myself, how can I possibly fill 10 minutes? You know, the issue for me is I don't know. You know, I thought about it for a long time, and I started to write a presentation, and I made myself depressed in the process. Because the problem that we have is that it is a global problem. You know, we can find ourselves a piece of land, a piece of property somewhere, and we can purchase it, and we can move there, and we can set up farms, and we can start growing our own food, and we can produce our own electricity, and we can do everything that we need to do internally ourselves, and we can make it entirely self-sustaining, but we would be a boat on a pond, and when that pond drains, we're on the ground. We don't float any longer. So the issue is a global issue, and it requires action by governments, and it requires a global process. And when in the WikiLeaks that were one of the things that came out was that the United States actively sought to torpedo Copenhagen, to torpedo Kyoto with the Copenhagen Accord. But we knew that already. We didn't need WikiLeaks to tell us that. We know that our own government has been working very hard, steadily, in order to prevent or to destroy the Kyoto process and to prevent any additional accord or global agreement on climate change. So as individuals in southwestern Ontario, well, what can we do about it? I think first thing we have to do is we have to acknowledge that, you know, we live in the part of the world that is largely responsible for what we face. And perhaps then that we don't have the solutions. Because when I look at the solutions that are being put forward, you know, when we look at nuclear energy, the electric car, when we look at replacing existing widgets with green widgets, when we look at the various ideas that come forward, what we're really talking about is we're really not talking about change. We're talking about how can we maintain our current lifestyle for a little bit longer without any regard for the consequences for the rest of the planet or future generations. And so the issue again becomes, you know, maybe we're not the best people to find the solution. Maybe what we have to do is look to the south for a change. Maybe we have to look at the leadership that's arising in the global south, whether it be Ecuador, Bolivia, or wherever, and perhaps maybe we have to start listening to them and taking our cues from them as to where we should go and what we should be doing. I think another thing we have to do here locally is we have to develop a vision for a post-capitalist system. It's not enough to say that capitalism is the problem. Maybe it is. But the issue is what comes after that. When we talk about transition towns, for example, what do we transition to? When I talk to people on the environmental side, or people who want to change the world and who reject capitalism, what I don't hear very often is a vision for where it is they want to take us. And we have to develop that. We have to, if we want people to follow, we have to tell them where it is we're taking them and how it is we're going to get there. We have to be able to envision a world that isn't based on GDP, but is based on something else, some other form of measurement. And the other thing we have to do is we have to start to counter what we consider wealth. In our society today, a single mother living in a home with two jobs, working two jobs part-time, not making enough to make ends meet, and going to a food bank, but who owns a television, by our standards, that person is wealthier than than an indigenous person who lives in a forest and wants for nothing. What we've lost touch with is what wealth is. Wealth is not money. Wealth is not iPods or iPads or television sets or the big home in the suburb. Wealth comes from the ground. All wealth comes from the ground. It's what we produce. It's what our planet is able to produce for us. And we've lost touch with that. So when we measure wealth, we're measuring what we own in material goods. But the news is you can't eat those things. You can't drink them. They won't sustain you when they fail. And so we have to redefine what we mean by wealth, and then based on that, we have to define for ourselves a future path, a path we want to take. And then once we've done that, we have to begin selling it to each other. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed, since I can't tell us what we can do, what I can tell you is what I've noticed when as an observer, as a political observer. When I decided to run in this past election, you know, I took it a little bit personally losing, but you know, that's the nature of being human, of putting yourself out there and trying something. But the truth of the matter is, when I went into it not planning to win. I went into it because what I said what I wanted to do was I wanted to change the nature of the debate. When we take a part of the argument out of the public debate, it's lost. And what happens is we see that the argument, when you're not part of it, keeps moving further and further the other way. When they talk about compromise, we're no longer talking about the center between here and there, we're talking about the center between here and there. We're losing the center constantly. So we have to be part of that. And what I see happening in election after election after election, we sit here in a room and we decide to ourselves that the planetary system is the most important thing in the world and that we're losing it. We really got to do something about it. And then they call it an election and we all go our separate ways. We all work for different parties and different candidates, and we work against each other very often. You know I'm going to anger some people when I say this, but the party system doesn't work. What the party system does is it forces us to atomize our efforts so that we work against each other. What we ought to be doing, in my personal opinion, again, is that run as independents and support each other. Because when I talk to candidates in election campaigns, provincial and federal, and I talk to them about climate change and about the place where we're at, and I say to them, why don't you talk about that at a public debate? And the answer invariably, regardless of the party, is that, well, if I talk about that, I won't get votes. Nobody wants to hear that. So I have to temper my opinions and my views in order to try and win the votes. And my sense of that is, well, if you lie to people when you want their vote, there's no reason to tell them the truth after you got it. And the other point of that, if there's no one telling the truth, then they're not hearing it. And maybe the reason to run for an office, any office, a public office, is to tell the truth and to try and get that argument out there and to try and bring the debate back over to where we think it ought to be. If you go out in the street today, nobody knows about climate change. They don't know how severe it is, or at least that would be the observation based on the number of people driving their cars to the stores in order to buy all that stuff that's being shipped 1,000 kilometers from China for Christmas. You know, and when you watch television, and we got rid of our television, but if you still watch television and you follow the marketing, they don't get it, and they're still pushing you to go out there and live as though it's still 1950s or the 1960s and you can shop till you drop. At some point, if we really believe what we're saying, at some point we have to begin to not just challenge the system, but challenge ourselves and challenge each other. Do we really believe what we're saying? And if we really believe what we're saying, then why aren't we abandoning the vehicles of the status quo to the extent that we can? We can't all do that. There's realities. I mean, we're all part of the, we're all fish in the fishbowl. We all live inside of it. We all have to have jobs. We all have to live within the current economic system to put food on the table and a roof over our heads and heat the house. But that doesn't mean that we can't challenge the status quo in whatever way is possible. And part of that has to mean at some point that we engage the political system in a meaningful way, not as independent individual people, but as a group, as an organization. And you know, we have all these tools today. We have social media, we have the internet, we have all these tools that we can actually talk to each other and organize and turn on a dime. And yet, as I said, whenever there's an election campaign or any kind of public debate, we all go our separate ways. And I think if we're serious about what we say we're serious about, then we have to start challenging ourselves on that, and I think my time is up. Thank you.